Hey everyone, welcome to this week's office hours. It is Wednesday, March 2nd at 4:30 Central Time. We are here going live to answer all of your startup questions, your entrepreneurial questions, anything we might be able to help out with. So go ahead and ask your questions in the chat. We are coming to you live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So we're gonna wait for a few people to start joining here, but feel free to, put your questions down here in the chat. And thanks everyone for tuning in. So if you're not familiar with Codalation, we're a custom web and mobile development company located here in Fargo, North Dakota. And we hold these office hours every Wednesday from 4:30 to 5 Central Time so that we can help answer your questions and hopefully make your entrepreneurial journey a little less difficult than it would be otherwise. So jump on, ask us some questions. If you want to learn more about us, you can find us at codalation.com. You can also find us on all the major whiz-bang social platforms at Codalation. So a few ways you can connect with us here. And Maddie comes in from Facebook saying excited for the new office hours. So thanks, Maddie. Looking forward to this here. And Maddie also asked the questions: how does Codalation's development process differ from other companies? So at Codalation, we do a little different development process than probably some development firms you might have worked with. Some may be very similar, but we found our own process and procedure that works really well for us. So what we typically do is we step in and we try to understand what are the business needs and the requirements that you're trying to do. What's the target market you're going after, and really understand, the industry and the world that you live in. We do this through what we call our discovery phase. And so typically this is a 2 to 3 week long process that we come in with a business analyst, a project manager, quality assurance analyst, a designer, and developer, I believe is the entire team there. And the business analyst and the designer help break down what are the requirements within your application, what should we be focused on. As that's happening, the designer starts to put together some wireframes to show you in a what's called high fidelity. So think of like a Photoshop document that you're able to click into and kind of use the app without having the app fully developed. So it's kind of clickable wireframes. We go through this, and that takes a little bit of time to break down all these requirements and needs. Um, at the end of our discovery phase, like I said, you get your wireframes. You also get a scope of work, a timeline, and a estimate for how much all this is going to cost, broken down by feature. Now, when we actually go into the development work itself, you have the ability as the product owner to be able to step in and rearrange priorities, add new features, remove features. And you can do this because we operate under an agile methodology to where you're in on a daily scrum or daily stand up with our team for about 15 to 20 minutes a day. You're there at software demos. You're really front and center of everything that's happening. So we're able to move very quickly and pivot if need be. So those are a couple of things that make us probably a little different than some companies, but may be very similar to other environments you worked in. But it's uniquely us, uniquely Codalation. So YouTube comes to us and says, what frameworks does Codalation use for developing mobile and web apps? Are there any you'd like the team to expand out to try and learn? Good question. It's a little technical for even me. I have not touched a lot of development frameworks in many years, but I can speak to what we currently develop on. So on the web side, we use the Ruby on Rails framework. We also use React.js as a JavaScript framework, and then we use React Native to develop our mobile apps. We've got a series of other projects that have some Python and PHP and C# and some other things in there too, but that's the core stack is React and Ruby, but we can certainly work in a lot of different frameworks and languages as well, but that's just what we prefer at Codalation. Eric asked the questions: how do I create my first wireframe when I've never created an app before? What you want to focus on is really that customer journey and the problem you're solving. Sometimes it's really easy to get in. And I find myself when I'm writing content, this happens if I try to get too detailed too quick. So I've got the concept of a small whiteboard and a big chunky marker. Like just start with major elements. Like on this screen, I want the user to be able to sign in and sign up. On this screen, I'm going to need some sort of a welcome dashboard or welcome message, and just kind of walk through the customer journey and the customer life cycle throughout the app, and really start low fidelity. We talked about high fidelity earlier. You want to start low fidelity and as chunky as you can get it, to say like, if I can accomplish this feature, this experience on this screen, that's all you really need to get to. And if you can map through your customer journey from kind of start of the app to I'm done using the application, what needs to happen, now at least you have a lane to go down, kind of bumper bowling, right? We're not going to end up in the gutter. We may not get a strike, but we're not going to fall off the rails either. So if you can do that, you can always refine and enhance and make it prettier and better as you go. But it's really easy to get too deep into the weeds and then you miss something because you're trying to get too fancy with it. Some tools to do that for your wireframes. I like using Lucidchart, Balsamiq. There's a number of great tools out there. Sometimes it really just boils down to, getting some paper and a pen or a marker and just starting to doodle to see what can happen. Because then you're able to, rearrange stuff. You don't have a learning curve of software or anything like that. All right, Facebook comes to us and asks the question, can you please explain what the term unicorn means? I see it being used in startup articles online, but I'm not entirely sure I understand. Absolutely. So unicorn is something to where it's a privately held company and it's valued at $1 billion or more. And a lot of people probably think that privately held means that you as the owner are the only one that owns the company. And that's not always true. A lot of times the company has received some sort of investment to get to $1 billion valuation, but they're not publicly traded on the NASDAQ or any other trading platform. So it's privately held from individuals. They've since come out with decacorns and dragons and all sorts of other stuff. A decacorn is a $10 billion private valuation, and they wanted it to sound angry or mean or something. So they've got the aggressive dragon, which is a $12 billion valuation, versus the unicorn, which may be a little more unicorn and rainbows versus fire-breathing dragon. So a few terms to learn about out there in the startup world. So thanks, Facebook, for asking that question. All right, let's see what else we have here on our chat. Yes, mystical decacorns, all the words you need to use. Facebook asks, how should I be handling pricing for my MVP versus my established product? Your goal of your MVP is to prove people will give you money. And I know of a marketing startup. It's a marketing tool. Their original goal was to prove that they can get 50 or 100 people paying something. I think it was $10 a month. Knowing that that was not their end target market, but they wanted to show proof and traction in the space so that they could go raise money off of it. And they were able to raise a seed fund of, I think it was a few $100,000 early on, when they said, the market wants this. We want to move upstream to a more enterprise client. And I think right now their average enterprise client is paying $5,000 or $6,000 a month, if I'm not mistaken. And their more retail customers are $100 to $500 per month. So they definitely had a big shift upstream in terms of who their customers were. But start somewhere, prove that people are willing to give you money. Obviously, forecast that out and make sure that it's not something that's unsustainable. But if you have a plan to move upstream, is that still the same customers? Do you have to reacquire customers? Are they enterprise versus individual clients or customers? All things to be thinking about as you start pricing your MVP. A lot of times you need to get it out there and just see what the market's willing to bear. for it. And at least then you know that you have access to a market that's willing to pay X dollars. Now, and again, if you decide to move upstream, do you currently have access to that, or what's going to take to reprice your product as well? So there's a lot of moving variables in there, but just prove someone's willing to pay for it, and use your financial models around that to see if that's sustainable or if you do have to make a shift. All right, so a question comes in from YouTube. What does sweat equity mean? Sweat equity basically means you're going to be one doing the grunt work on it. And typically, if you've got two business partners that are coming in, it's not uncommon to have someone that's a financial partner and someone that's a sweat equity partner. So think of it outside of a startup, and maybe like you're buying an investment house. So we've got Steve and Bill. Let's say Steve comes in and says, I've got the 20% down. I'm willing to put that money up to purchase the house. And Bill says, I don't have any money, but I'm willing to go in and tear out the carpets, put new ones in, to repaint the walls, fix the bathroom, and make sure that it's ready to sell. So the sweat equity partner is going to actually go in and do the work, sweat, as their investment into the company or the property in this case. So great question. A lot of times founders will come in and not have any money to put to it, and they're both just working towards it. And sometimes that's a great way to go, because now you don't have somebody that's got money in, and how do you look at it equally if you're equal partners? If I put 50 grand in, you're not doing 50 grand worth of work, does that sometimes cause tension? Facebook asks, do you recommend being able to put this in the sweat equity yourself when starting a business? I say yes. Not everyone's able to walk away from a day job and be able to just work on their side hustle. So it's very common to start something as your side hustle, work nights and weekends and whatever time you can to get that up and running while you still have the safety net of your day job. So I would definitely recommend, if you have the ability to, which everyone does, to put your own time and energy in. Otherwise, is it really something that you're starting, or is it just more of you have an idea and you're going to give it to somebody else to go fulfill on? Or are you going to tap your own bank accounts to pay yourself a salary? I think it's far smarter to keep the roof over your head and everything paid for, and then transition in once you've gotten a little closer to making it a reality. But sometimes the leap from idea and enough paying customers to pay yourself a salary is a pretty big gap. So I think that's a lot of people underestimate it. YouTube asks, how do you decide if your product should be open source? So open source software means that you're going to release it and release the rights to it in some form. There's different licenses behind open source software. And basically, one of the most popular ones is saying, I'm going to write this software, I'm going to give it out to the world. You are free to modify it and use it for whatever you want. But there's no rights back to me, and you can't come after me if something happens because of it. It's your software that you're using. And so if your product is, if you got people paying for your product, you typically don't see that as like an open source software. Sometimes it comes into play, like if you're like, there's some e-commerce platforms out there, for instance. So like WordPress is open source. Anybody can go download WordPress and use it, but then there's paid pieces on top of it. So if you got paid themes or plugins, that's probably the place where I'd see that open source software lives, is you need to monetize it through some sort of a maintenance and support, an enterprise level, something else. In terms of if you're not trying to give it away for free, I'm not sure exactly how you would do that, but certainly something to think about if you want to get a large user base on a platform. The downside is that you do have to maintain that to some extent. So there's a lot of resources that go into it. But you can also get some great collaboration with open source software. So I see it more as, somebody's got a hobby, or they're trying to be, thought leaders, or companies putting something together that they're going to use, and they open it up to be a good development partner. Facebook asks, where do I go to do market research for my product? Go to the market. Your best place to do research for your product is into. I'm going to be a broken record here of Rob's book, The Mom Test. You want to be out talking with your audience to find out, what are the solutions that they've tried to use in the past to solve their problem. If you can figure out what they've used and why aren't they using it anymore, then you're able to compare it to the solution that you have and see, are you a me too solution, meaning it's the same but there's a little tweak to it, or are you coming at it from a completely different angle? Because a lot of times people just look at their product and say, well, I'm different, you don't get it. And that's where you've got a real struggle ahead of you if you haven't done that market research. So definitely lean into that, understand where your customers are. And sometimes, the solution is apathy. Like, it's just not a big enough problem to solve, so they don't do anything about it. So that, it's something you're competing against as well. All right, YouTube asks, do you use or have any free open source tools or software? Yes, there's lots of open source software. For we use WordPress on a lot of our web and sales page builds, which is open source. A lot of our text editing softwares that we use, so like I've used, I think it's called Atom. I think it's from GitHub. In the past, it's open source. There's just a lot of stuff out there that's open source and free to use with a paid upgraded license or something like that. So don't get nervous around open source. It's a great way that companies have been able to get out, develop a product, and like I said earlier, upsell for a pro version or an enterprise version down the road. So don't be afraid of open source. It's a great place to get tools when you may not be able to pay for them on the front end. Facebook asks, how do you decide what benefits to offer employees? For example, equity, profit sharing, health insurance benefits. I would, if you have employees, I'd go talk to them. What are their needs? Is it a bunch of 20-year-old guys that are invincible and don't need health insurance? Or is it established families that have kids to take care of? It's going to be drastically different compensation packages in those cases. Equity is a tough one because you've got to declare, I think it's anybody over 2% equity in a company, and equity is really tough to get back once you've given it. Plus, there's a lot of strings attached going into tax season. So for instance, if, let's say that you have a company and I'm not an accountant, nor do I play one on TV, so don't take this as accounting advice, but using it as just a general explanation here. So let's say that you've got a company that's profited $100,000. Now, in our case, our company's an S corp, so that flows through to the owners, and so the owners would have to pay tax on that $100,000 profit. And so if you have a bunch of employees that or team members, partners that are equity partners, that's going to flow to them as well. So you really need to be sure that if you're giving equity, you as the company are either able to step in and help with that tax burden as a distribution to them, or they're able to take care of it on their own. So equity is definitely a tough thing to kind of roll back once you've rolled it out. So definitely be careful around that. A lot of companies have looked at equity or phantom shares or other things as well to help incentivize. A lot of times I'll be on a vesting cliff, it's called, so that if if my company's giving me 10% equity, they would do it over 5 years. So I get 2% equity every year up until that 10-year mark. So if I happen to leave in year 2, I would only leave with 2 or 4% equity in that case. All right. Facebook asks, how much can the product development timeline vary for different app or web app projects? It can vary wildly from, days or weeks for a proof of concept all the way up to, years in terms of development. It just really depends upon how big, how many features, if you're working with a development company, the recommendation I would always have is what's the timeline, what's the budget, what's the breakdown by feature, and if they can't answer those questions for you, there's a good likelihood that you're going to put a bunch of money in to something, and you're probably going to be spending more than you think you are. So get a timeline breakdown, get a budget breakdown, get a cost by feature, cost by role. What are you paying for? We've had clients come in and say, hey, we want to use our own designers versus Codalation's designers. Some people just want the developer and not the rest of the support team. So that's definitely something that you want to understand what it is you're paying for. So with things going on in the world lately, should we be more concerned with cybersecurity? I think, yes, you should always be concerned with cybersecurity, no matter the state of the world. Definitely make sure that what you're doing isn't a secure. The website you're going to has the lock icon on it, that you're using strong password protection, like a 1Password or a LastPass. So definitely be focusing on that. And I'm getting the flashing icon that my camera is going out of battery here. So gremlins from prior days. So let me see if I can switch over here to my other camera without breaking the world. All right. Well, that was fairly painless. So great. We will continue on here, and I will get that battery swapped out and see if I can get a better battery indicator on my camera. I've got a Canon EOS that I've been using with a 15 to 45 millimeter lens. I think it gives a little better picture than the face or the built-in Apple camera, but this will work for now. So got a few minutes left. Go ahead and throw in your questions to our chat here, and we will do our best job to answer them. Again, if you're just joining us, Codalation, we host office hours from 4:30 to 5 o'clock Central Time every Wednesday. And we host them on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So feel free to join. If you know any entrepreneurs, any startups that are in need of startup advice, startup help, have them jump in and join the conversation. YouTube asks, what are your thoughts around using app builders rather than custom development for an MVP? So app builders, I'm going to take that as low code, no code solutions that you can kind of drag and drop and connect things. I think that's more than fine if you're going in and trying to validate the market. Understand if what you're building has a real need. It's an easy, cheap way to go in that I think most anybody can learn how to do. We've also done this with just a design sprint of going into Adobe XD or Figma and really laying out the screens and making it clickable to get that feedback. So I'm all in favor of the least cost-effective way to get validation or feedback from your audience, because that's going to be one of your biggest risk points if you don't get it. Is going to be that MVP. I mean, would you rather get validation that your idea is good and you're solving a problem and spend $2,000 or spend $200,000? I think that's a pretty easy decision to make. Now, with that being said, you might need to go and throw away, your no code, low code solution, but that's certainly something I'd be willing to risk if I can get the feedback from the market. How can I position? Facebook asks, how can I position my product to stand out from the competition? Mr. Eric on Facebook, broken record. It's how are you solving that problem? You can stand out by being a shinier, better designed product, kind of taking the Apple approach, but ultimately it's going to boil back down to having that target market fit and that need there. There's a lot of companies out there, take CRMs, for customer relation management software. Take that, for instance, and there's thousands of them out there. So how do you pick the right one for you, right? It needs to be based around saving me time. Maybe it is a shinier, prettier version. Can I automate things with it? look at all the discovery you're doing through that target market validation, and understand that, you know, cost savings are real and time savings are real. And sometimes people say they want to, you know, spend less time doing something, but they're not willing to pay for it. So try to balance the standing out. We did this with a phone product we developed. We integrated with Microsoft and Google Calendars, so that if you're busy on your calendar, you could write a rule that says just send that call to voicemail and don't bother me with it. We thought it was really cool and everyone would love it, and turns out no one ever used that feature. They just wanted to be able to simply route calls to their cell phone during certain time windows and then to voicemail after hours. And a lot of real estate investors use that to route calls to. So sometimes shinier and fancier solutions just muddy stuff up, and they just need a very simple, easy to use product. All right, we got a couple minutes left, so if anyone has any final questions, toss them in here before we hit the top of the hour at 5 o'clock Central Time. If we don't have any questions coming in here, we'll go ahead and be wrapping up. So join us every Wednesday from 4:30 to 5 o'clock Central Time for Codilation office hours. We'd love to help answer any of your startup questions that you may be wondering about. And if we can't answer them, we'll certainly find somebody that can. So join us every Wednesday. Next Wednesday, March 9th, we'll be coming to you live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So thanks everyone for asking your questions today. Thanks for joining. And we hope to see you next week. So have a great week.